Today we're going to discuss the difference between cravings and hunger signals. It's not always easy to tell the difference between the two of them when you start on a carnivore diet. What's shaking, bacon? We're going to start with a bit of an update about myself. I've been doing this way of eating for about 14 months consistently, and for quite a few years before that, probably about 8 years before that, inconsistently. And it's been going really well. I've lost 150 pounds in total, probably just over around 100 in the last 14 months alone. And it's going pretty good. One of the things that's helped me is understanding the difference between cravings and hunger signals. Now, I always used to give in to cravings. A craving is something where you're desiring a specific food, and it could be a different food each time, usually high in carbohydrates or sugar. So what we want to do is try and manage that and try and understand what's happening when we're going through a craving. Cravings, you give into them. Just think of a smoker or an alcoholic always giving into the drink or the cigarette. People with sugar addiction often do the same thing with carbohydrates and junk food. We want to try and make this manageable. We want to try and understand what's happening so we can identify the problem and stop it at its source. The problem with cravings and how to recognize them is it's a craving when it feels like it's uncontrollable. You have this crazy desire to have this food that you can't stop thinking about until you get it. And sometimes you might convince yourself, and this is the logic sometimes, that cake, I shouldn't have that piece of cake. But I can have that pizza over there, or I can have that ice cream, or I won't have this ice cream because it's more calories than that ice cream. So you can start rationalizing things, and cravings can start messing with your head. You're basically playing around with the hardwiring in your head and your hormones. So it can be really difficult to manage these things because you get these overwhelming urges to follow through with these instincts. And you might say to yourself, well, if I'm craving it, well, obviously my body needs it. Well, that's not how it works with cravings. That's how it works if you have a mineral deficiency or you need a particular type of protein or something like that in your diet, because your body needs fat and protein. It doesn't need sugar. Needing and wanting fat or protein, that's something that's more of a hunger signal. You know you're hungry when you start to get a little weak, you're a little tired, maybe your stomach starts growling, you get a little hangry, or, that's usually some signs that you've waited too long. If you start to feel hungry, that's when you should eat on a carnivore diet. You might even be a step past when you should eat. So I'm a big believer when you're starting a carnivore diet and staying full for the first 2 or 3 months. Yeah, it seems like a long time, but that's how long the sugar cravings can last. And you want to override those sugar cravings by staying satisfied with the food you can eat. And trying to stick to a red meat is often a good way to go because of its high fat content. That keeps you satiated longer. So waiting till you're hungry is kind of risky when you're doing this, because that's when you're going to give into cravings. And that's when you might make an impulsive decision to eat something you shouldn't eat. Now, waiting till you're really hungry, that's kind of going to the next level. And you want to try and stay between a 3 and 4 to 5 with hunger. When you get to a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, you got to stop and think, you know what? If I don't eat something soon, I'm going to be at a 7. And a 7 is when I typically want to give in to temptations. So stopping yourself at a 5 is a good way to go. That way, your 6 is your maximum, because you don't want to get to the point where you feel like you have to go and give into a craving. You get past a 7, that's where you're in the dangerous territory, because a 7 is when you want to give into a craving. An 8 is when you're actually driving to the place to get it, or you're calling the place to get it. And a 9 is when you're giving into it. And the higher you get in the scale of 1 to 10, the higher risk factor you have for giving into a sugar craving. So we want to stay between a 3 and a 6, ideally. Recognize when you're at a 5, don't let yourself get up to a 7. We want to stay away from selective cravings. When you're looking at a certain food, and often a junk food, that's when you know it's a selective craving. That's not a hunger signal, that's having a craving. And you can get those from looking at a picture, watching a commercial, going to someone's house, going to a restaurant, and you're going to think to yourself, oh man, that just triggered me. And you want to watch triggers. Now, triggers can be what I just talked about. It can also be emotional eating. You want to recognize what leads up to these triggers being triggered, right? So I learned when I was 25, when I was having a brownie after an exam in college. And oh man, when I ate it, I noticed my shoulders just dropped. And I thought, oh, that's what cigarettes do to smokers. I just had a weird reaction. And I realized at that point, I had an emotional eating problem. Now, I didn't realize at the time it was also a carbohydrate and sugar addiction. But I learned more about that through the years later on. You want to get to the point where you can manage these triggers. So substituting that food for a food you can eat is a really good way to go. Instead of giving in to the craving, have something you should eat and get full on it. That's just for the beginning, because eventually those cravings are going to go away and you won't have to start doing this stuff. It may take a few weeks, it may take 2 to 3 months, but you will get there. And these cravings go away, and then the food doesn't control you. Lots of people say it's so restrictive being on a carnivore diet. You know it's restrictive? Being controlled by every food craving you have. And that can be really taxing and overwhelming, and it can create a lot of health problems. So get full before you go to your friend's place for dinner, or get full before you go to a restaurant. Get full on the food you can eat before you go into these situations that are often a little bit out of your control. That way, when you do eat there, you're not going to be tempted, and you can just have a little bit of food that's there, just enough to, be socially acceptable. Now, non-selective hunger. Being in tune with your hunger signals is what we were discussing a little bit earlier. That's when you want to stay between the 3 and 4 up to about a 7 or so. Learning where you are on that number scale is a good way to go. Stick with those lower numbers. Let's discuss some ways to manage that now. One good way, I think the most important thing to do, especially if you're an emotional eater, is managing your stress levels. I did a few videos back on managing your stress levels. I think that's a really good way to go. That way, once you've managed that and recognize your stress levels that trigger your hunger, trigger your cravings trigger the junk food raises your blood sugar, the blood sugar creates highs and lows that make your insulin go out of whack. Your insulin's preventing you from accessing your fat as fuel. So you can see how one thing just leads to another. And these cravings and this emotional eating can lead to bad habits. These bad habits can become a regular occurrence. Some people, it might just be after dinner. But eventually, if it gets worse and worse, you might get to the point where I was at, and you just give in to them any time of the day. Now, I always drank a lot of water, even though I dealt with all these cravings, but keeping enough water in your system is a good way to go, because sometimes when you can't recognize a hunger signal, sometimes you are just thirsty. Making sure you're hydrated is a good way to go. So try and get your urine to be the color of lemonade, not apple juice. If it's clear, you're overhydrated and you could be flushing minerals out of your body. If you wait till it's too dark, you're really dehydrated. Then you're going to start having other symptoms: chapped lips, cuticles in your nails pulling back, dry skin. Eating enough protein and fat, fortunately, comes easy if you're on a carnivore diet, because those things keep you satiated. Keeping satiated is really going to help you get in tune with your hunger signals. So once you've learned the balance of not having these highs and lows and getting stuffed and having your blood sugar get out of whack, by doing this carnivore way of eating, you're just going to find that you're just like a calm ocean, and your waves are nice and even all through the day. And so is your mood and your energy. Now, when you have carbohydrates in your diet and you keep giving into these sugar cravings, you're like turbulent waters, and you're going to have highs and lows. And the more you have these highs and lows, the more your energy's out of whack. The more your energy's out of whack, the more time you're going to need sleeping and taking naps and just being grumpy at certain points through the day. And sometimes that's just your blood sugar. So that's why we're doing this carnivore way of eating, because that's one of the benefits, is keeping your blood sugar even. And that keeps your cravings under control. Now, recognizing the triggers that leads to emotional eating is something else we have to worry about, because it's one thing if you're dealing with the emotion, but you want to deal with the emotion not only in a better way by eating healthy foods, but recognizing the triggers that lead up to that. Maybe it's just going to work and having to deal with the public or coworkers. Some people just have triggers. Maybe it's family of some kind. So what you want to do is try and recognize what triggers lead you to that emotional eating. You can't always knock them out, but just recognizing them and having some food on hand so that if you have the desire to do some emotional eating, you can stay full on the food you're allowed to have. I always found that with a carnivore diet or zero-carb diet, if I had anything off this way of eating, like junk food, I was off the wagon, and I was continually going off the wagon. So what happens is, you don't want to give yourself an excuse to go off the wagon. You don't want to say, I'm going to treat myself once a week or once a month if you're dealing with sugar cravings. Now, I have a friend of mine, he doesn't deal with sugar cravings. He's been doing carnivore for 3 solid years, and every now and then he has whatever he wants. It might be a burger with a bun. It might be poutine or something, but he can have that, and it doesn't faze him. He doesn't beat himself up over it. He goes right back to his next meal being carnivore and doesn't think twice. I personally can't do that. Kudos to him. It's just not in my deck of cards. So managing your hunger signals, not letting yourself get too hungry, is a really good thing. So you might find you just can't eat junk food. This is where you're going to learn if you're a moderator or an abstainer. trying to manage all these triggers is part of becoming self-aware of what you're doing and the habits you've gotten into when it comes to this way of eating that has led you to the point where you got to go to a carnivore diet. People are often doing it to manage their weight or just different health problems. You don't want to do something that's going to make you kind of fall off the wagon. You're going to have to really start paying attention to your body. But at first, I think it's a good idea to just ignore your body and just stay full. In my opinion, it's really good for the first month to 3 months to stay comfortably full on the food you're allowed to eat and worry about the hunger signals afterwards and try and figure out the difference between cravings and hunger signals. Because when you're going through carbohydrate withdrawal, it's just too much all at once in the beginning to try and deal with carbohydrate withdrawal and trying to figure out if you're hungry or it's just a craving. So you know it's a craving typically if it's something that you're not allowed to eat and you just can't get it out of your mind. Hunger signals are just you kind of recognizing like, hey, I'm starting to feel a little weak or I'm a little hungry right now. Maybe I should have something in a little while. Have it now, not in a little while if you can. Always kind of keep food on hand. Try and manage all this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it educational. If you can, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. I hope everything's going well for you and we'll touch base soon. Thanks a lot.